Milo, is that you?
There, I think I got it. That's it. That's all you got to do. There's I think our tonight, Marcus.
Mm-hmm.
I believe tonight our guest is very. He actually was on the podcast many decades ago. Like 7, 8, 9 years ago, I believe he was on the podcast. Many years ago, and then I think it was a Wednesday night chat that I ended up catching up to him. I saw him again about a month ago, and I went, Peter, you got to come back on the podcast. So tonight's guest is a gentleman named Peter Stempel, and I've been selling him to Derek. Derek, say hi.
Hi, Derek.
There, boy. I've been selling him to Derek over the last week as this is a real Renaissance man.
A Renaissance man.
Yeah.
Renaissance man.
Renaissance man. And
I do think this is the first guest who we've had on the show that's been published in the Academic Journal of Homeland Security and Emergency Management.
There you go.
Yeah. So this is a big get for us.
And probably from this point forward, there'll be more people from Homeland Security that will want to come on.
Right. Checking this thing out.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, right. If they weren't worried before, they're worried now.
Yeah, who are these guys? Why is anybody listening to this? And what is a Renaissance man? Anybody know?
Not so sure I'm that smart.
I think it goes back to the Renaissance when you had people in business supporting the arts, people in arts dabbling in sciences, the intermixing of academics, and the invention of modern banking let us, buy things, buy services, and therefore we had the time and institutions to mess around with science experiments in our mansions.
I think we got a problem here. I may have oversold them. It says it's an outstanding, versatile, well-rounded person.
And it was also a 1994 comedy and drama starring Danny DeVito, who played a down-on-his-luck businessman who desperately takes the only job offered, a teaching position in the U.S. Army. Movie called Renaissance Man in 1994. That's the first thing that came up when I Google searched it.
With Danny DeVito?
Danny DeVito. How about that?
That sounds hilarious.
Mark Wahlberg.
Wait, what?
Yeah.
Oxford Dictionary says a person with many talents or areas of knowledge. Well, that sounds like you, Derek.
No, I don't think so.
You have many areas of knowledge.
If you have two units of knowledge out of 100 in more than one area, then sure.
Now we got to talk about two things. So let's get our guest in here. Peter, would you please come in from the green room?
Okay, let me just get unstuck from the Gurkha sofa.
How many years ago was it that we talked? It must have been like 8, wasn't it?
It was more than that. I think it was like literally, I think it was the 5th guest or something.
Wow.
I think I was right in the beginning. It was Jason Reese and other folks, So it was early days.
Yeah, so it'd be like probably in black and white.
Yeah. Yeah, and the sound was all scratchy. And
yeah.
It was all kind of flex on the screen.
You had to mail out a cassette tape each week.
Yeah, no, that's what you did is you saw it and then you wrote for the cassette transcript at the end of the
show. Now, before we get on to Peter and asking him all kinds of interesting questions, because I was looking at his blog today, which, by the way, I don't know if you know this, Peter, but I consider blogs to be like a pimple on the butt of society.
I know you hate them.
Yeah, but that's okay.
I know you hate them, but you know what? The thing is my blog is utterly random and pointless, and there's really nothing to follow. So because you don't have to follow it, it eliminates one of the things you hate most about them, and that is that they're difficult to follow.
Oh, okay, well, perfect. A true Renaissance man. Okay, so we got 2 points of business we got to get to before we start asking you some serious in-depth questions. First off, what did you think, Derek, about your first, or Marcus, did you see Derek's first version, part 1 of Hobby Thoughts?
Yeah, it's deep thinking for sure. And we may have an even deeper thinker with us tonight. So,
I think Marcus, you and I are just going to be watching.
Yeah, from the sidelines.
This perfectly fits into your nickname, Noob.
And I don't know how I got invited on this podcast.
Yeah, exactly. And so, Derek, how did you feel like your first? What would we call that? I guess it was like an op-ed piece.
I guess so. Yeah. It felt like very weird to put it out.
Yeah, you seem very, very concerned about putting them out, and yet you got a fairly good response, I thought.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, nobody's shown up at my house with a warrant for my arrest yet. So, I mean, so far so good, right? No, it was interesting to put it out there. It's not the first time I've like generated a document. We did we've done other things before, but this is the first time that it's gone out to the Patreon group or anybody who's on Patreon, and I think. Good response. I think Sean Carney had a good, he kind of also felt weird about the tariff drama and said, why am I buying so much stuff just to keep up with everybody else? None of the new stuff makes me happy. What makes me happy is modeling. So I thought, he really got it. And our buddy Mike Hauk said that he was going to use the line, it's not what have you bought recently, it's what have you built recently, in his next NMRA division newsletter. So I thought that was pretty cool. So I hope it helps people reconsider or rethink the prevailing wisdom that in order to do the hobby, you just have to buy stuff constantly. And hopefully we can detach all the marketing hype and BS from manufacturers and just get back to making cool models.
We should try to talk to our guest, Peter, about that at some point tonight, because I'd be interested in his opinion. Because you make a very good point. The hobby has become, for a lot of people, just buying stuff. And there's, it's more fun than that.
Well, yeah, and I think some of the manufacturers have like had this narrative. I'm not talking about anybody in particular, but throw out the models you used to have because now we've done it the right way. And I just think that's and so that just puts you down and makes you feel bad about your previous work. And I just don't think that's healthy for the hobby. And it's supposed to be about craftsmanship, not throwing away your hard work just because they mass produce something.
And one of our beloved members of the AML Nation, Scott Lister, aka the Table Master, if there's anybody that knows about building things from scratch, it's that guy. I mean, that guy gets more satisfaction out of building stuff than anybody I know.
I mean, he not only took his locomotives that he built to the St. Louis RPM, he actually built that little module, hand laid all that little track, all the track on there, and spiked it down one at a time. I mean, that's definitely talent, and we've always known that's talent.
Well, sure,
with him,
and that's the whole point of his existence, is that he builds everything pretty much from scratch, and which is really what gives you the most joy in the hobby. I've been trying to get my hands working again pretty good, and I've been feverishly building stuff, throwing most of it away because halfway through it looks like crap. But feverishly building stuff and starting to realize that's what I enjoy doing the most. I've always enjoyed the most is building stuff. It's like building a kit is like, or scratch building a structure is like putting Lego together. It's piece by piece, and you build it up until it starts to look like something. So do you have plans for another op-ed piece?
I'm working on one right now. I'm not sure if it's ever going to see the light of day, but
you got to be a little bit braver. Your stuff is fantastic.
I'm thinking about why we worship people in the hobby.
Okay.
Like, why do we have big names in the hobby? Why do we spend so much time talking about celebrities?
Well, and I would say something I've thought of, and I was actually talking to my wife about it, and I've said it here before. Really, the hobbies, not this hobby, but hobbies in general, whether it be model cars, RC planes, RC cars, plastic modeling like tanks and all that stuff. It's all of them are about showing off. And at the end of the day, they're about showing off.
Yeah. But then we interviewed Rob Bennett a couple weeks ago, and he made the point that, the world's best model railroad, nobody knows about
I
it.
know, and I thought that was
that's
an
a great
excellent
idea.
point.
That was a great point. Yep.
Yeah, I thought that was an excellent point because there's a fella I was actually, because I think I found an old Kelly Questions with Emery Lehman that I'm not sure I ever published. And I thought, I got to get Emery back on the podcast because he works with a fella that has this fantastic, massive model railroad. And there's guys not far from somewhere in the middle of Ohio that have, and I've actually tried to get them to come on the podcast. And it's a dad and a son building this like 40 by 60 fantastic model railroad. Like nobody knows about it. And I think he's made a very good point. But at the end of the day, I think for a lot of people, hobbies are about showing off. You build your thing and then you want to show it to people.
Mm-hmm. Share it. We have to share it with everybody. And, that's what we talked about many times before. You build a model railroad to be able to run it with people and share it and, show it off and make it come to life.
What do you think about all that, Peter?
Yeah, you know what? You're all speaking my language because, I actually pulled out of social media in large part because I kind of got tired of how the show off was warping my hobby a little bit. And, it's just like people start liking something, you start doing more of it or things like that. I read Derek's piece. I really liked it. And, I think you should do more of them. I think we've come into a place in the hobby sometimes where people are so afraid to speak up, that we don't. And there's a kind of a groupthink that happens, where everything gets to be the same. So I'm 100% behind it. We just have to build a culture where Derek can put his opinion out there and people can have different opinions, and that's okay. And we talk about it not in a horrible way, but just in a really constructive and engaged way. I don't agree with everything Derek wrote, but I also agree with 90% of it, and I really dig it. Frankly, my attitude is there are enough model trains in blue tubs to like fuel the hobby for another 100 years. We don't have to manufacture another train for another century if we could just like harness everything that's stuck in a blue tub in a basement.
Wow. Yeah.
I've thought that for a while because how often do you hear people say, well, I just get a blue box model to practice my airbrushing or get a blue box model to practice my weathering. And I've thought to myself, well, when's that going to be that time when you go to Springfield and there's no more blue box models? Probably never. Like you say, that's, they're going to say, oh my God, we've finally run out of old Athearn kits. Nope, wait a minute. Bob has 14 blue tubs full of them, and there'll be more coming. They'll never, ever go away. And you're right, Peter. We probably would never have to manufacture another thing and have enough fuel to keep the fire going for 100 years.
Yeah. I mean, I love the manufacturers, and I don't blame them for this. I think it's kind of a thing that arises from the culture of social media where it's become this advertising juggernaut, and frankly, the people at all these companies are just people who love the hobby and they love making stuff. They want to make cool stuff and they dig people digging it. Right. And then there's that legion of people who's ready to tell you that the brake lever's in the wrong place, and so it's built this kind of escalating culture where, like we can do these miraculous things with models. I mean, the models that are coming out today are unbelievable. But I think it's been kind of a culture that's built up between the manufacturers and the consumers, and I think we all have a piece of the blame for it. But if you look at like the stuff, like I saw this video from one of the manufacturers making stuff in Europe, and they issued some, I think it was Rapido in their England stuff. They issued some fictional paint schemes on some of their locomotives, and the fictional paint schemes are the number one seller, right? Which goes to show you that people are a lot more open-minded and a lot more open to different stuff than maybe, we think if we're just in the culture of what's being said on social media.
Yeah, I've had an opinion for a while, quite a while, which I'm not saying is right. It's just my own personal opinion that I'm not so sure that saying that everything has to be a prototype model is necessarily the way to go because, the hobby's been about, in the early days, it was, the uncoupling and truck railroad, it's like the Gory and Defeated. Most railroads were not prototypical model railroads. They just followed whatever the owner enjoyed. And we talked to a fellow last week, Rob Bennett, who just runs whatever equipment he likes on his railroad. And he has a beautiful, an absolutely fantastic model railroad, and he just runs whatever equipment he likes. Everything about his railroad is craftsman quality. The track, the scenery, the structures, everything is craftsman quality. But he just runs what he likes on his railroad, and is quite happy to do it.
So I spend a lot of time in sort of German model railroading circles, and in Germany they have a word for this. It's called the Spielbahn, which means play railroad, and it doesn't mean a bad railroad. In fact, like it's often like epically beautiful scenery, well put together, right? But people feel no obligation to make it into a, like a mimic of a prototype or something like that. And those people exist along. There's still the Fremo guys who make things exactly perfect for a certain year and era and, in their group, right? But I think actually the fact that they have a word for it, like kind of creates a bit of space in the model railroad culture that makes it more okay to be that kind of model railroader. And I think it's a useful idea.
Yeah, that's
wow.
That's cool.
Yeah, leave it to the Germans to have a word for that. Like that's really great.
And see, Derek, I hold Peter's opinion in high regard. You've got to write more of these because you have a knack for expressing your opinion in a very easy way to a very, very easily read format. It seems to flow out of you. It may be your specialty in model railroading is expressing opinions.
Making people angry?
Nobody's angry.
No. Okay, good. That's right. Okay.
They only get angry.
Conversations like this help, right? Like, I think
the only person they get angry at is me. That's why.
There's enough people out there already doing that.
The thing is like in a space like Patreon, right? Because like, okay, so everyone on Patreon is like paid their money, not gotten their T-shirt. They're committed, right? So, and there, like I think the idea maybe could be to build a culture, right, where there's like respectful discussion. I'm a professor at a state university, and I tell my students when they come into my classroom, I said, look, I respect your values. I respect that your values are different than mine, and I'm going to cultivate a space where you can stand in your values, where you don't have to pretend your values are different than they are, right? But that also requires us all to treat each other with respect and the idea that we're all, discussing things in good faith and not getting escalated. And if you cultivate that culture, right? Like, and I think the idea of Derek making that thought piece is great, and and people respond and put their 2 cents in. I think the internet pylon is a pain in the butt, right? But I think Patreon kind of gives you a space where maybe you could avoid that a little bit because everyone's known, right? Like they, it's a more cultivated community. It's less random.
Exactly. Exactly. Now, before we go on, and I haven't forgotten, but I wanted to I should have probably done this in reverse. I had not forgotten. I had a note right here in front of my face. This particular podcast, which is on the free channel, is sponsored by White Rose Hobbies, not White Rose Nurseries, which is a now defunct company in southern Ontario. White Rose Hobbies, which is in York, Pennsylvania, at 4401 West Market Street. Their phone number is 717-505-8676. The operators are standing by. Call them and order something. And tell them Lionel sent you, and see if that helps. Maybe they'll add 10% for aggravation.
They'll put the Lionel tariff on there for you.
Yeah, the Lionel tariff.
Go to their website, buy something.
Yeah, whiterosehobbies.com. And what is becoming my favorite page under retail and racing is candy and snacks. I think these two guys have, they think that they've done this but they have 2 pages of Jelly Belly jelly beans available.
So should we order some of these and send them to Chris Wayman for his next operating session?
That is a great idea. Oh my God.
We have Krispy Kreme donut flavored Jelly Bellies.
Yes,
we have all
exactly.
kinds of stuff here.
Cotton candy, the citrus mix. What a fabulous idea. We are going to do that. I'm going to do that. Oh my God, what a great idea. I knew you weren't just a pretty face, Marcus.
It's a good thing.
Yeah. Yes, Peter, if you didn't know, Marcus is the AML Nation's most eligible bachelor.
I do know that.
Yeah, how about that?
Yeah.
But I'm not available, so
I'm not interested, Peter, but thank you.
It's whiterosehobbies.com. We'll talk about it again at the end of the show.
If we remember. Sorry, guys. So, Peter, you mentioned you took some time off from social media, but I just noticed, I'm looking at your blog, which, by the way, randomrailroad.blogspot.com. Great domain. You took a few years off of your blog, too. It looks like you started posting again this summer after taking,
I literally just posted because I talked to Lionel. It was shut off, actually.
Oh, wow.
So I just posted like 10. I just went and quickly made 10 posts this last weekend, so you guys would have some clue as to a fraction of what I've been doing, because just because the blog stopped doesn't mean the model railroading activity stopped. I just got sick. I mean, got tired of like photographing and posting. And I realized, it's like I'm all about the making, and it was just slowing me down. And I went through this, I started to just say, oh, screw this camera stuff. And I just would go down, and all of a sudden I would get like 2 and 3 times as much done, And then when I stopped having to browse social media all the time, and not having to, but, it's like this impulse, I took the thing is I got onto Facebook because I was participating in Model Rail Radio, which was a predecessor podcast to the AML, right? And, and there was like half of us were on the mailing list and half the people were on Facebook, and it sounded like Facebook was fun, and it was like literally the whole reason why I got onto social media was because of the hobby, and it was cool and all, but I just found that like I had this impulse to always look at my phone, and then when I took that stuff off, I would pick up my phone. I would just I find myself looking at my phone at odd times, and there's literally nothing to click on because I had wiped all the stuff off of it, and I realized like, oh my God, this thing is like captured hours of my day. And then I started to recapture those hours, and my model railroading time has gone up significantly. And it might not be for everybody, but for me, it's worked really well, because it's like when I'm with the kids, I'm with the kids. And I go down my stairs, and I'm in the basement, and, I'm modeling, or I'm soldering, or I'm doing whatever,
I think that's a great discussion. I'm somewhere in the middle. I feel like you're right. Like social media can start just gobbling up your time, and you find yourself scrolling to look to see what's there. But I've talked about this before. I had one of the greatest experiences I ever had because of social media was meeting up with a friend that I hadn't seen in 32 years. And he just one day sent me a message saying, is this the Lionel Strang that I know? And then I had 2 incidents like that over the last 15 years. And so I'm somewhere in the middle. I agree with you completely that if you don't control it, it just gobbles up your time. But on the other side, I do find a lot of useful information that is, I feel like, it's, and I always look at, once a week on my iPhone, they send out a screen time thing. And I'm always amazed that like my screen time for a day is like an hour and 10 minutes. And that includes sending message. I do a lot of text messaging with employees and other people and stuff like that. And it's like, oh, well, it's only an hour and 10 minutes a day. That's not so bad, because half the time I'm doing it while I'm sitting at a stoplight or something, or I pull over, to send a message. So it's really not that big of a deal.
Yeah, I mean, I think the thing is, I think also just a lot depends on the circumstance. And you're right, there's a lot of things I miss out on, and I do miss some friends. And though it's interesting, it's like living in 1995, it's not so bad. I do call people and, do email people. Like there are, we had like, it's easy to forget, before social media, right? Like we were on the railroad line or other, there was a lot of stuff going on before then, right? And I found that that I'm still connected with people. But you're right, there's a huge trade-off. And it was just, I was going through a lot of stress. I was taking care of my mom because she was sick and those things. And I feel like, probably what happened is part of it is also just your circumstance. And, when you're stressed out and you're tired or worried about something or whatever, like, social media is like this fast dopamine hit. And so, it just got to a point where it was out of control for me, and it might not be out of control for you or whatever. And that's cool. But for me, it's just been working really well to dial it back, and it's like, and, it's amazing because I found other ways, like you've talked in recent podcasts about like Dave Meeks of the Thunder Mesa thing. And, like I'm on his Patreon, and there are a whole bunch of people who are getting stuff on Patreon or whatever. And I've noticed like the chat, as social media gets a little bit more, convoluted, like there are more people trying to like start stuff up there. And I'm part of a couple Discord groups, that are good. And they tend to be more limited, but it's enough for me.
Yeah, no, I think that's a great discussion to have, because I think there's all different levels. And I think that's what I like about the podcast. And recently I kind of realized some people have been complaining I just ramble on about this and that and next thing. And then suddenly I realized the only reason I ever started the thing was to ramble on. So, I mean, like, that's the way it's going to be from now on. It's like, listen if you want and don't listen if you don't want, because this is the way we're doing it. And we have the people that do come on, we have great discussions with them. And yeah, I like to tell goofy stories, and, that's just the way it's going to be. But that's the beauty of the podcast, is because I'm talking to you. If it wasn't for the podcast, you and I likely wouldn't have an in-depth discussion. And because we wouldn't have an in-depth discussion, I wouldn't get to hear your point of view as clearly as we are tonight or this morning, whenever you're listening to it. And to me, that's important. That's what I get out of the podcast and doing the podcast. And I'm useless at social media. Like I rarely post on the fans page, and I wish I did. I wish I was like our buddy Chris Wayman, who seems to be able to post constantly, but he's always out there rail fanning, and it's like he's our rail fanning god, It's like, and I think the trick, like I've said to my wife recently, I thought, there seems to be so many podcasts now. I'm thinking this is like the days of CB radio. Back in the late 70s, when everybody had a CB radio. Like, I think the podcasting fad will die out somewhat, because it seems like everybody and his brother has one.
Yeah, it'll be on to the next thing at some point. But you're right. I mean, you had everybody had a CB radio. My dad had one riding around and talking to everybody he could think of to talk to, and then everybody had a social media wise, everybody had a MySpace, and then MySpace went away, and it's just progressed. So.
Yeah, I think podcasting is a little bit more like, I remember the CB radio. I'm old enough to remember the CB radio thing too. And like it built like you actually had like communities of people on the highway, and that was a really interesting thing. My father jigsawed the console of the 76 Suburban to put make the CB radio look built in, and, varnish the wood. And it was comical, but, anyway.
My dad loved his CB radio. Like,
oh my God,
and he was so into it. And I'm thinking, well, he probably would love having a podcast too, because he loved, socializing with people. He was like totally into it. And then I worked for the railroad at that time in the trucking department, and we all had CB radio, so I already was doing it. But it was kind of like, get off the air, you people! You're not supposed to be here.
Yeah, I remember my sister was 16, and we'd go on this family trip every year. And my sister got a Chevy Chevette, and she was driving her car, and my father, for safety, got her a CB radio. And he would have to break into the CB radio as like truckers were hitting on her going down the highway.
You hear that female voice, right?
Right, exactly.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, the thing is like, like there's a podcasts have built a huge amount of community, and I mean, the AML is like totally unique in the fact that it's persisted as long as it has. I think that there's sort of like, everybody's got a couple hundred shows in them, but it's hard to keep going. But, it was like Scotty Mason did it, the Ryan Anderson crowd did it, and AML is that. And I think the thing is like, there is a sense of intimacy and a sense of connection that comes from that. That's like radio, the way that people used to get into and feel like they would know and could pour their heart out to like late night, radio hosts,
Yes. Yeah.
And I think that's something that, the podcast has, and it builds a real sense of community.
Yeah, this is Casey Kasem. This song goes up to a lonely trucker down in heading across South Dakota.
Our long distance dedication.
Yeah, and people would call them up and they'd pour their hearts out to them like,
Yes.
they were like old friends, and it's like somebody you'd never met before,
There used to be a guy on radio I think it was called Coast to Coast.
Oh, yeah, Art Bell.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then George Norrie.
Yeah. Those guys had these fantastic shows that you'd dial them in the middle of the night when you were driving somewhere, and it'd be like, people would call in, and there would be, like, they'd always have these eclectic people, like the Numbers. There was, I always remember a guy I was driving somewhere in the middle of the night, and he had this guy on that said that numbers meant something, and George W. Bush was the 42nd president, and that adds to 6, and he was born on such and such a day, which and it would be like, no, and it would just be this goofy stuff, but it was like you couldn't stop listening to it. You know what? I'm just thinking, Derek.
What's that, Lionel?
Unfortunately, you weren't born in time for the CB radio craze. Why not get yourself a CB radio and get on the airwaves there? And
I think I'm gonna pass. I was alive enough to watch reruns of Chips on the mornings when we had snow days, and I remember thinking, why would they have CB radios? I mean, why wouldn't you have a car phone back in those days? Like, could you imagine having a radio people could listen in on your conversations? How silly is that? So, yeah.
Okay, so Peter, what are you modeling these days?
I've got a few things on the go. The things I'm actively building is I'm building an ON30 layout that's portable. It's the Virgin and Lost Shore, and then I'm building a HO scale model of a city in Germany that's along the Rhine River that was a famous train watching spot called Oberwesel, and which is like powerful electric locomotives hauling top tier passenger trains fast in the 1980s is sort of the theme of that one. Just because I lived in Germany when I was a kid, and I remember seeing those trains going over. I lived in that region. I didn't live in that city. I lived nearby in another city, a couple other different cities nearby. And I was a young kid, and I just remember seeing those trains, and they were, completely captivating. And so, I'm just that's sort of been a long time goal, and I'm just building it now.
Derek, did you get the photos that I sent?
I did, yes. The photos of his workshop or the photos of his modeling?
Well, the photos I sent, he sent me about 5 photos that I forwarded. Marcus said he didn't get it.
I got your email. Yeah. I think so. The 3D printed models on your blog, the Dicker 10 and 11, are those HO or O scale?
Those are O14, so they're O scale that runs on 14 millimeter gauge, but they can be made to be ON30.
These are 3D printed?
Yeah. So the thing is, so to digress from the current, from the current modeling obsession, I got on the 3D printing bandwagon, the resin 3D printing bandwagon, when it was like the bleeding edge of pain, and Form Labs came out with the Form 1, which was the first consumer resin printer. And it was like, 2009 or something like that, or before. It was before all these ones that use the video screen to do the printing. It was a laser, and it was a really, you wasted more than you made. And so I went really heavy into that for a while. I messed around with Jim Lincoln a lot on that. If people remember Jim Lincoln, he was a model rail radio character, and he's a prototype modeler who's now spending more time doing got really heavy into fitness now. But yeah, I got really into that. So that's a project. I've got Dick Kerr locomotives coming out of my ears. Dick Kerr, it's a War Department light railway locomotive that was made during World War One. So during World War One, trucks weren't that good, and the roads were crap, and there was mud everywhere. It was just horrible mud all over France and all over the battlefields. So they used these light railways on hastily laid modular track, and when they brought ammunition to the front lines, they couldn't use steam locomotives because obviously the plume of steam would give away where to aim your artillery. So they came up with these petrol locomotives, and the Dick Kerr was one of them, and Westinghouse made another one, and that were used on the Allied side to haul ammunition and troops to the front and stuff like that. And so that became sort of a thing. And you know, for whatever reason, I just thought the thing looked cool because it's kind of like this, it's got rivets all over it. I mean, it looks like it's a real thing, but it could have been like ripped from the pages of like a steampunk magazine. And, you know, so I thought it would be a really cool 3D printing subject. So that was the thing that I you know, essentially I made that model. Now I can print them like in like 5 minutes. You know, not really 5 minutes. It takes about an hour and a half to print the parts. But the reality is that back in the early days of 3D printing, that thing was stressing out the daylights of it. So that I sort of worked on that project for years as I progressed through different 3D printers.
Yeah, your blog is kind of like a nice reminder of how quickly 3D printing has evolved here, because like you go back just like 2 pages on your blog, 3 pages, and we're at you 3D printing a passenger car roof and using Bondo to smooth out the layers. And it's like, wait, this is the same technology. It's been about 10 years, and it's like,
right.
Wow,
no, I mean,
we've come a long way.
It's a whole different world, you know, like and it really is. But the thing is that, I mean, the cool thing is now, you know, I've got like 3 resin printers, and, you know, I bought in 2012, I bought this like cheap Chinese laser cutter back when everybody told me I was crazy, and they, you know, it's just like, it's pretty crude, but the thing works, and it works well. And you know what? I've had to like resolder the circuit boards and stuff, but it's still working, and it's still cutting models. You know, so you know, there's some pain being on the bleeding edge, but some of it's worked out okay.
Just before we get too far ahead, so it wasn't actually Dick Kerr.
It's DICKKERR.
2 companies that were a company that it's started by one fella, and then it was purchased or amalgamated with another company that was called Kerr, so it became Dick Kerr, Dick, Kerr Company. So just so people, in case they're looking for it,
yes, exactly, Dick Kerr and Co.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah. I mean, there's a guy who goes to the Harrisburg show every year. I can't remember his name, but he's got a great World War One layout that he had there a year or 2 ago, and it was just fantastic. But you know, there's a whole subculture of people who are into the World War One stuff.
Well, there's a whole subculture of people doing all sorts of stuff. I mean, it's kind of overwhelming when you think about it. Like,
right. But I mean, this is. Yeah, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say that's the more I get into things, the more I become flabbergasted by, you know, what's available now. It's like there's subcultures about everything, like that. What we said earlier, you know, about the best layouts are the ones we don't know about. Like I know I've said it 1,000 times, and I'll say it tens of thousands of times more, but this hobby is way bigger than anybody realizes. I mean, you look at your basement, you know, you have this, you know, fabulous workshop, and, you know, I'm sure some people know about it, but it's your hobby. It's what you do in your spare time. It's something that, you know, you enjoy to do. And I think there are all sorts of people like that out there.
Yeah, no, I mean, for me, it's just like a fundamental thing for mental health. Right. Like, you know, like life is crazy. Things are stressful. You know, I love making things. I've always loved making things. And me having my hands in making things is, you know, just, I've learned the hard way. I just got to do it. And, you know, and the thing is so I have this thing where I I try to limit myself in any layout I build to about 20 square feet of scenery max, right? And maybe a little bit more sometimes. The overways the layout will be a little bit bigger, but it'll be big for me. But the point of it is that I want it to be achievable because I've got too many interests. And the idea of like, I admire people like Tom Jacobs who are like building like an epic model railway that represents a whole line or whatever, but honestly, like there are too many cool things out there to build, and so for me, like my hobby can be like, I want to build, like I'm interested in the World War I equipment. Honestly, the World War I scenery and stuff is pretty gruesome. I'm not into that, like I don't want to model that. I don't want to model bomb craters. It just doesn't turn me on. But I do dig building models of the equipment. Like in the overways layout, like the visible portion of that layout isn't going to have a single turnout, right? But the point is like that's all about modeling and weathering passenger trains, right? Because that's a cool activity to do too, and like putting them in scenery. And you know what? My Lost Shore Lines layout is all about, it's a switching layout. And that's, I run that thing almost, even though it's in scenery and I'm working on the scenery, right? Like I literally come down almost every morning before work and move the locomotive around and move some cars around.
And now how big is that layout?
That layout is 22 inches wide, but it's got these little bump outs on it. And it's about 10 feet long without staging. And then it's got some staging cassettes that I can put on the end. And the thing is, I designed it so that it can come apart. It's got legs that fold up into the bottom. I use the details there's a group, Tim Ware's put a video up of it, of the Narragansett Bay Railroad and Navigation Company. And I met with those guys when I was in Rhode Island. I looked at the details of their layout. So I adopted their layout construction where the legs fold up in the module. And like the first module has two legs and the other modules all have one leg that folds down. So it's really fast and easy to set up. And the idea of that is that I'll be able to put that in the car in their size so that I can keep one of the back seats up for a kid car seat and bring my son or daughter with me. And, so that one's made to be, movable. So it's big enough to have like a terminal station, a little harbor, and some cool stuff to do.
The Narragansett Bay and Navigation Company. I found it.
Yeah, that was it's a fantastic group, the NB and RN. It's a cool group. They're a really inspiring bunch. If I had not left Rhode Island, I would have wanted to build something and join into that group more.
Well, for those of you who remember you from your Model Rail Radio days, which by the way is our sister podcast, and it's been a long time since I've said it. Had it not been for Tom Barbalet, this podcast would not exist. Period. End of sentence.
Yeah.
Thank you, Tom.
Not everybody's thanking you, Tom, but some people are.
Well, I thank him all the time. I just emailed him the other week.
Great guy. But he would let me ramble on, and then he'd have to move on to somebody else. And I thought, well, this isn't any good. I've got lots more to say. I have
a lot more rambling to do.
Yeah, I got tons more rambling here.
Why don't you shut that guy up? Why are you letting that guy talk on so long?
Yeah, exactly. So I remember back then, let's just kind of recap, because we do a shorter version of the podcast now, which I really enjoy, because then I get to do like two podcasts in the same sitting. And so what I remember, the thing I remember the most was you had moved into a home that was about the size of a shoebox.
Yeah, it was 500. So, when I was on your podcast, I lived in Utah. I was a community architect, and I was designing buildings for people. And then my wife and I just decided to up and move. And I went to Rhode Island, and we bought a 540 square foot house. It was on 2 stories. If you can imagine, if you put a tape measure on the outside of the house, it was 18 feet by 18 feet outside dimension. The downstairs had 2 rooms that were about 8.5 feet wide each, a living room and a kitchen. There was a staircase that went up to 2 tiny bedrooms and a tiny bathroom. And we had our two, and the people in the neighborhood called it the doll's house. It had been built like in the 1930s as like a mother-in-law house for one of the adjacent houses that was bigger, and then subdivided off. And and we bought it, and it was great. We were really happy there because I had walked to a fish market. I could walk to work. I went back. I kind of reached a point where. The thing is, I like doing the thing, and I was an architect. I had a great business. I reached the point where people were starting to give me big checks for retainers, and I had a bunch of employees, and I was spending more time managing people, and I was good at it, and I could do it. But the thing is like, I really like to draw. My engineer used to give me trouble because I used to always like to do the structural calculations first myself. And, I like doing the stuff. And I just said, what am I going to do? Like, I could, I sort of imagined myself in the local hotel, like at, age 65 or 70 and having a dinner and say, yep, he designed a bunch of good stuff. He was a good member of the community, whatever. And I thought, I know how this tape plays. And I had an opportunity. I had an opportunity because I was also doing a lot of visualization work then I was essentially offered to have my PhD paid for. And so I said, we said, screw it, let's do it. And went to Rhode Island. And so we lived in that little house. We were really happy there. I could walk to a great fish market. Could ride my bike to the beach.
What island was it?
Well, Rhode Island's not an island, but there is a big island in the middle of Narragansett Bay called the Quidnick Island.
Okay.
Right. I just, I had to grip my teeth every time you played the Rhode Island song and made fun of Rhode Island on the podcast. But I get it. Because Rhode Island is an awesome state.
Well, sure. Every state is awesome in its own way.
Yeah. Yeah, of course. Anyway.
So you lived on the island. And I remember, too, the thing that absolutely floored me when we first talked was you had artwork that was on display in the Bradley International Airport in Hartford.
No, it was in the T.F. Green Airport or now the Bruce Sunland Terminal in Providence. So the thing is, I've had like 3 careers.
I know that's what makes you a true.
I kind of do one long enough, and I'm sticking with this one. But I kind of just shifted from thing to thing, and I'm really lucky in the sense that I've always followed what I'm curious about and doing, and somehow I've managed to stumble up. Like as I make these shifts and do these things, and it's been okay, and it's kept things interesting and moving along.
Stumble up. I love that. Stumble up. So
yeah, the thing is like right now I do work that sort of combines art, design, and science and engineering, and it's like if you look backwards, right, it looks like everything adds up to that. But when you're going through it, right, you're just like everything looks inevitable when you look backwards. But when you're going through it, you're just kind of feeling your way through and you don't know what's going to come next. It's just like making scenery.
Well, I was just going to ask, is that like part of the artistic mind coming through to be able to revel in the uncertainty? Because I feel like most people with a strict science or engineering background that I know wouldn't be able to pivot like that and wouldn't be able to sort of find their way into and trust their instincts. They need a clear roadmap and a clear plan. I wonder if that's what makes you unique.
Well, I think there are a lot of people with this ability. So here's the thing is my mother used to give me the ditch digger speech in the car, when I was in school, like, do you want to grow up to be a ditch digger? And, of course I would make her really angry by saying yes, and I had a difficult time in my younger years in school, and I didn't really, I didn't think I had an aptitude for a lot of stuff. So I kind of became, the art guy, and I was good at art and I loved it. And I'll tell you what, I got a design education, and the thing that it gave me was it made me fearless to try anything. There was a colleague I had at an art school where I taught. His name was Jack Massey. He used to tell that his freshman students would come into his classroom. He would tell them to take a piece of paper into the shower and draw the water, right? And of course, all these kids have been like the best kid in art in their high school or whatever and drawn all these anal pictures and stuff. And it's just like, what do I do with this? right? And the thing is, though, is that kind of education, right, makes you unafraid. And when I ended up doing my PhD, I was asked to develop this kind of visualizations of storm impacts, and I started working with stuff. And mind you, I'm like a self-taught programmer, but I was connecting these models that were made by oceanographers with visualizations. And they were skeptical. And then one guy said, this guy is like he had been trained in physics in the former Soviet Union and emigrated, and he had written like these complex storm models that are actually used for forecasting. He's like, look, just explain to me what you're doing. I sat down, I drew it out on the chalkboard exactly how it works. He was like, that's actually better than what we do now. And all of a sudden they were like giving me access codes they're giving me logins for supercomputers at other universities and things that I had to learn how to use, right? But it's like putting the chocolate in the peanut butter and making a Reese's. And, like I tried something that someone hadn't done because I was fearless. And, and that worked okay. And I had the luxury to do that, because I had built up a good head of steam. I had built a business and built up a good head of steam. So I knew that like if I failed, I wasn't going to be poor, right? I'd figure I could always go back to being an architect or whatever. But I did that, and that just took off. And I was self-conscious about it because I was a self-taught programmer. But then all of a sudden it would like reach this point where people who I thought were like the super expert were calling me for advice. And I was like, oh, actually, maybe I do know what I'm doing now.
So are you Will Hunting?
What's this?
Are you Will Hunting?
I've never saw that movie.
Well, okay, it's about a guy that was a brainiac who didn't, and then he would go to the chalkboard and solve problems that other people couldn't solve. And it sounds like you're that guy.
Yeah, but the thing is, what's missing is the part where like I'm beating my head on those first years, right? Like I'll tell you what, those first years when I was like, essentially, I told my PhD advisor because I was the same age as he was, right? I was like way older than all the other students. I was in my 40s, right? And, and it was like, I remember like, and I said, okay, I'm going to need to take this like cosmic algebra class, this linear algebra class, or I'm going to have to learn this crazy stuff. There were just so many hours of me like beating my head on the wall. But the thing is like as an adult doing that, the thing I had that I didn't have when I was younger was the willingness to sit at my desk for 8 hours straight and just beat my head on the wall, not getting it, and then figuring out that I just like misplaced a comma or something. But I just stuck with it.
I actually had a conversation with Alex Lang, who's the fellow that owns the Station Inn in Crescent, Pennsylvania, who we got to get back on the podcast. But he's he has worked his way up through different railroad jobs, primarily all of them in the computer end of running the computer departments and making programs and all that. And his story was his was similar to yours in that I feel like if you were coming through at the end of the 80s and the 90s, it was such an early time in this particular field that you didn't necessarily have to have a really good a really good resume of education to get certain jobs because there wasn't a history of it. Does that make sense?
Yeah, well, I think at a certain level, right? Like, there's also just a level at which it's like if you're doing the work and you're performing, like this is the thing I think about computer science that's interesting, right? It's like if you're doing the work and you're performing and you're getting results, you have respect, right? Like that trumps pedigree.
Okay, but then you have to get the chance to do the work. That's what I
right. And that was the whole thing. Is just being there, beating your head on the wall long enough, and then like, the thing is, the other advantage I have, right, is I could connect the models to pictures, right? I was making really cool pictures, right? This is where the art thing comes in, because like essentially, like the science guys were like, oh yeah, make some pictures for us, and then they're like, well, wait, how are you doing that? And then all of a sudden they're like, oh, okay, it's like, so the thing is like being able to do something they can't do is always a good angle. And
I think like part of what our brains do to us is they trick us into thinking there are established limits to what we can do, what we can understand. because that's like a safety mechanism, right? And so like, real creativity is kind of ignoring those and living in that messiness, so that at the end of the day, you end up advancing beyond where you fragilely thought was the limit of what you could do, right? You can only be creative once you push beyond what you think is possible.
Yeah, I think there's also just a matter of like giving yourself space, right? I mean, this is the thing I work with my students all the time. This is the same thing with model. Like all of this could be said about model railroading, right? You got to give yourself space, and you got to give yourself time. And you got to like be willing to let it be an awkward teenager before it's like a beautiful adult, like everything goes through an awkward stage. Like you got to stick with it. And the thing I work on this with my students all the time, because they're so used to being good at stuff and getting things done, that the idea of like sitting with something when you're bad at it for long enough and just like giving yourself the space and giving yourself the time, not giving up, and just sort of like moving along, like don't cut yourself off, don't cut yourself short, just give yourself the space. And so like when I give my students projects, I actually tend to like give them, I like some teachers, when a student is not performing, assign more work to their students, right? They take more and more on. The problem is the student will never get it done. Right. So what I end up doing is like dialing back the expectations, asking them to do less, but give them space to dwell, give them space to think. And, the thing is, I find with the model railroad, it's like, I set out to build my lost shore lines. I had all these structures, and I'm like, how do I fit them in? And, but then I just sat there and looked at it, and I'm like, this looks like shit. And I just like realized like, okay, I got to take 50% of the structures off the layout. Really, there's only room for like 3 structures in this 20 square feet if it's going to have anything like the space and the feeling I want. And, but you got to give yourself enough time to get out of your own way and to think.
Mm-hmm. It's funny. I have a friend. Well, we'll decide if it's funny. But I have I checked myself there. I have a friend who was a professor at art and design school, pretty good one, and he said that the problem he had was he taught a lot of first year students, and they came from environments where they were only told that they were super talented, and they had like a confidence in their talent that prevented them from like being able to revel in the misery of being stuck on something. And so like they have built this sort of, they've been built up by their high school teachers, by their parents, by their communities to say, you are a fantastic artist. And then his challenge was, and yes, you are talented, but you need to push what you can do. And I think as model railroaders, we can fall into this sort of mindset that, well, everybody else does it well, right? I see it in the magazines. I see finished models done, and they look convincing. And I've built previous models that turned out okay. So why isn't this one turning out okay? Like we hype ourselves up so much and hold ourselves to these standards of being talented, of being successful, of being finished. And it either prevents us from ever starting something new because we want to rest on our laurels, or we're afraid of not being able to figure out how to do it. Or we get halfway through and we realize this doesn't look like a finished model. This doesn't look perfect. And then we set it aside and never come back to it. I'm guilty of that, which is I'm looking at a drawer full of 4 locomotives that are taken apart that I wasn't happy with how they're going and haven't gotten back to them. So I think I appreciate and applaud you for being able to stand back and say, this looks like shit. I have to change the process.
Yeah, I mean, the other thing is like once you've junked a locomotive, okay, like let's say you've just totally royally screwed up the weathering on it, right? Well, you have nothing to lose at that point. Like, scrub it off, paint it, do something else with it. Like you're learning, and it's like, I've got plenty of models that I've junked. And then, sometimes I have this like boxcar that's like, it's like, I've been using it for parts. I found like one of the first locomotives I weathered in like 1985. Okay. My father used to talk to me, say like, Peter, railroads actually used to wash their locomotives, right? Like not everything looked like it came out of like, like some post-apocalyptic Great Depression, because it's like the only, I got that airbrush, I figured out how it worked, and I finally got it working, right? everything, just looked like it had been through, had never been washed in 40 years. And the thing is, I was looking back at it, and I hid it away for a bunch of years, but I needed some screws or whatever, so I dug it out, and I'm like stripping it for its screws or whatever. I'm looking at it, like, actually, this isn't that bad in the grand scheme of things, But man, did I ever learn a lot, and I'm really glad I have it,
That's I think what you said too is I didn't want to pass by it from a model railroading standpoint. Is that's what I started to discover was that less is more. Like you said, less structures actually made the scene look more realistic. And I thought, if I was ever starting over again in my 20 by 30 foot room, I think I would just build a giant, I might have one divider wall, but I think I would build a single track railroad, a single track all the way around the room, fully scenic it, so that I could just run the trains around the room and through a fully scenic area. And then I might add a siding here. And then I might add a mine over here. But I think at first I could see me just having a single track running through scenery and being extremely content with that, because I like to do scenery. And, you don't need, like, operations is great. Operations is a fun part of the hobby. But the real hobby is building stuff. That's what the real hobby is. And then at the end of the day, operations becomes like the cherry on top. And then, But
I think, it's like, not to bring a thing, but, Derek's got his charts, or whatever. It's like, it's a million different hobbies for different people, And there are some folks like Dave Barrow with his Cat Mountain in Santa Fe, where it's like, hey, the scenery is like a lower priority. Everything's flat. I just want to operate these trains and have enough scenery to like get you into it. Right. That's cool. Right. That's not me. I'm a builder, It sounds like you're a builder too. And it's like, they're just, and it is a building hobby.
It is a building hobby. The whole hobby is about building. Anyways, that's the end of the first. That's the end of the first part of our 37-part trilogy with Peter Stempel.
If I may, I had a quote that I sent to David Lund, who didn't show up tonight because it was his birthday, apparently. But we were talking about a railroad design, and this quote feels relevant. But it's, perfection is finally obtained, not when there is no longer anything to add, but when there is no longer anything to take away. I think that caps this conversation pretty well.
And where did you get that quote from?
This is a quote from Antoine de Saint-Exupéry in a book called Wind, Sand, and Stars, but it was in a book I'm reading right now. What's it called? It's from Rick Rubin on creativity, or the creative act.
You have to write more of those op-ed things, because I don't know why you're so afraid to do it, because I have an eye for excellence. I think that's why I've been so successful as a independent businessman, because when I see somebody that's going to be a great employee, I just kind of stand back and let them learn how to be a great employee. And you just have the knack for thinking things through and writing. Your writing is spectacular. You should write more of those op-ed pieces and just enjoy the adventure. Like, they're going to yell at me. They're not going to yell at you.
Okay, fair point. As long as that's the deal, sounds good.
Exactly. I'm used to people yelling at me. It's what people do. They yell at Lionel. Because I just have a face that encourages people to be mad at me for some reason or other. I don't know why. It's just I was born that way. So that's the end of part one. So let's once again remind everybody that the podcast is now sponsored by White Rose Hobbies in York, Pennsylvania, right there at 4401 West Market Street in York, PA. And they have that really cool barn. And if you really want to get something really cool, they have tons and tons of Jelly Belly flavors in stock. And I think, Marcus, your idea of sending some of these to Chris Wayman is a complete no-brainer. Like, man, you have hit the nail on the head, buddy. That is just a brilliant idea. We got our goal in life, Peter, is to help Chris Wayman with snacks. Now, I'm sure you've heard me talk about him on the podcast, but he's another guy. He's done like I think one night we counted up, it was over 50 videos for Green Frog Productions. And he is so nonchalant about it. And I'm thinking, I've been buying these videos, buddy, and now I actually know the guy. Like, and he's just so nonchalant about it. It just fascinates me endlessly.
Yeah, Chris, do you have a YouTube channel? Yeah, I do, but I don't tell anybody about it.
Yeah.
So, right.
It's like, all right, anyways. All right. So we've reminded everybody the podcast is sponsored by White Rose Nurseries. And unfortunately, the modeler simply known as Kelly is not here. So, Marcus, can you give out our email address?
I can. If you want to reach us by email, you can send us one by sending us an email at modellerslife@gmail.com. And that's modelers with one L, like random railroad, not two L's like lost shorelines.
Wow, nice. Nice. I was thinking one L like Stempel, not two L's like lost shorelines, but yours is just as good. Good job.
Excellence there, right?
Yeah. Not as good as Kelly. Let's
right. Yeah, we can't. Nobody does it as well as Kelly.
Nobody can. And if you didn't catch our email address, if you go to our website, amodellerslife.com, right there, we have installed a widget where it's there's a spot right there to fill out emails right at the top of the website. If it's on your phone, you just scroll down a little bit and it's right there on your phone. Boom, you can just fill out an email. We need some emails so we can do another email show. And we'd love to hear from you and see what you like and don't like. And if you like this podcast, which was on the free channel, and you'd like twice as much podcasting a week, you can join for a few cents a day. You can join our Patreon channel. And if you go to the T-shirt level, you're entered into the game that's sweeping the globe. Hey, dude, where's my shirt? Because everybody that's at the T-shirt level gets a T-shirt once a year that's only for Patreon members. And as time goes along, we are slowly catching up. The next person to get a T-shirt is going to be Daniel Banks. The records have been brought up to date, and now the next person to get a T-shirt is going to be Daniel Banks. That's how organized we're starting to become. The game will always exist, because unfortunately the guy that's in charge of sending out the T-shirts is he's kind of slow.
Will you be including a new headset in that package?
No, he found his headset.
He found his headset.
Oh,
nice job, Daniel.
Yeah, way to go, Daniel, because we got to get Daniel on the podcast. So, Peter, are you available for tomorrow's show?
Surely.
Perfect. Okay, so this is going to be an episode. So, Peter, now we're gonna need you to say "Happy Rails" to you. Now I know you're a veteran of the podcast and you've listened to many.
I know the rules,
right?
No singing, no flourishes, no dancing.
Right, exactly. No. What is the word? What do I say? No
interpretation.
Yeah, no interpretation of any kind. Okay, it sounds like you're ready. So let's get right to it. Well, Peter, as we close the barn doors on another episode of A Modeler's Life, and the sun slowly sets over the back 40. I guess there's nothing else left to do except for you to say,
Happy Rails to you.
While in Busted Knuckle, guests of A Modeler's Life podcast stay at the Casa del Sol Motor Court and Inn, where late-night dancing at the Rumba Room is a magical event to be experienced.
It's another Lincoln Homer.
Oh, yeah, that was good.
That was dramatic.
I like
Suspenseful, even.
Suspenseful. What'd you think, Marcus?
Very good. He needs to be the official Happy Rails to You voice of the podcast.
Could be, but he's kind of
Peter does have a voice for podcasting.
He does.
Yeah. He has he has a voice for CB radio.
Breaker 19, Breaker 19.